Good morning, Chairperson.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I was running, now I am breathing heavily.
Yeah, I think it's good that we are running because 12 o'clock also I have to log in for the debate.
Oh, okay, at 12 o'clock. No, we'll be long done with it. We will make sure that at least latest, if you were to delay you, it will be 1:45, but we will be done with you at 12.
I don't think I have to go that far because I was still preparing something, and I've been told that.
How are you, ma'am?
I'm good, and how are you?
You look so beautiful and young today. Bright.
That lipstick.
Bright and beautiful. That lipstick
on point.
is on point.
God's grace. God's grace.
Yeah. You know what I need you to do? Just close the space above your head just a little bit, so that I can have more. You see how I look. You see more of the.
More of you.
Yes. Okay, and then that should be fine. You're using tablet, ne?
No, it's a
laptop, a phone.
it's a phone.
Oh, okay.
Wow, you are so good there.
Yeah, no, we trained you very well.
You are very good.
I just want to check if they can hear. You can hear them in the studio.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep quiet so that you can listen and see. Check if you're able to see the studio. Siblalo is in the studio, and then if you're able to see her.
All right.
Thank you.
Ma'am, you can hear them in the studio.
No.
Oh, they have not. Okay, I don't think they have joined in because you would be also seeing them. Okay.
All right.
They have just joined in. You can see Mado is coming in. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Okay, you can see Sibulelo. Yes, that's the person you're going to talk to. They have joined in now.
Firstly, let me put it this way. Women and men who agree with it are not fighting this struggle in their own terms. There are others who, in spite of valuable evidence all around them, believe otherwise. So they resist. So it is important to recognize that of course progress would have been faster, would have been quicker if we did not have resistance to changing conditions in the manner in which we have been socialized. And so it is important to recognize why that is absolutely critical. The interests which patriarchy serves to feather the nests of a few who are dominant in society is an important thing to recognize, that it represents the very crucial obstruction to progress we must make. So we have to be able to recognize that although progress has been slow, she would be outcounted by the number of women in leadership positions.
It's also true.
Both socially and economically,
Absolutely.
today, unlike during her period. I mean, the fact that she was the only woman in Bloemfontein when the Congress was established is itself a very dramatic thing.
Absolutely.
Let me put it differently. When Madiba first composed his cabinet in 94, and then you look at cabinet now and its composition, that in itself is dramatic. So you can see features of the difficulties we're confronting, yet the progress we are making as well. It may be slow, but it's almost amazing in certain respects. And as we speak, I refer to the education struggles out there in the public as we do this interview. That the majority of young people who are getting into education are women.
True.
Increasingly in institutions of higher learning, generally speaking, the numbers are suggesting that women are becoming educated in greater numbers than men. So that's a significant statistic, a number that says to us some progress is being made.
Deputy Speaker, when it comes to issues of patriarchy, some have argued that patriarchy, as compared to the advancement of gender equality, patriarchy itself, that's a whole movement all on its own, because it takes effort to sustain it. It's deeply embedded within the culture and customs of our society. It's deeply embedded even in the culture, institutional culture, in governance structures and everywhere we go. How do we begin to dislodge? Where do we start? And what is the role of men?
Let me add, and in the conduct of women and men, women themselves are not innocent of perpetuating patriarchy.
Absolutely.
They are at the heart of the perpetuation of patriarchy. And when they are free, they and some men of those patriarchal views, the environment becomes cleaner gradually over time. And it's almost revolutionary when you find the way in which women bring up their children to acknowledge and recognize that both men and women are significant, that young men must not be free, for example, of household chores at the most basic level. Okay? That the expectation must be that apart from our biological differences, we are saying we're human beings and we must respect each other as such. There must be no assumptions about hierarchy amongst us simply on the basis of biological difference. So in a sense, you're right, it's a huge problem, the role of men. Our institution, Parliament, has enabled us to participate in a variety of forums internationally. I'll come back to that. But we have also worked together with the Department of Social Development in order to advance gender equality, in order to advance the role of men in gender-based violence and femicide. And so that work has been very significant. We've had the privilege to do that, to host men in Parliament talk about from their provincial environment and subsequently from the district environment.
Yes.
So that we do this work in every district almost. To talk about what is our experience of men, why do we do what we do, and how can we then, how were we socialized to accept such problematic views about women and so on, and how can we undo that? So it's been very important work. And we must credit the work of the Department of Social Development in collaboration with us in Parliament, and also significantly the Men's Forum that is part of the South African National AIDS Council, SANAC. The deputy chair, Dr. Kanaho, has been driving the movement. It's called Takalani Rime. It's a word. Let me enter into what it means in case I'm mistaken. But essentially, it's an invocation of the necessity for us as men to rise to the challenge, to speak about problematic aspects of our bringing up, our socialization, as well as those of women, and to recognize why we can live without some of those things that are problematic. And also how it is also, this patriarchy is used as a fig leaf for those who want to, who exploit both men and women, and especially women, in that they will even get paid, even they still are getting paid lower than men are. Because it is in the interest of those who want to profiteer to do that. So they are advancing patriarchy and its elements, in spite of giving the impression they are not. It's in order to advance profiteering and so on. So
Absolutely.
it is an important observation to make that the role of men is critical. In their being dominant in those areas, for example, explains partly why it is difficult to persuade some of them to think otherwise.
Absolutely.
But secondly, also, in our own traditions and customs, there have been practices that perhaps were not quite appropriate, that help some men to justify some of their activities. Those cultural practices, culture is a dynamic phenomenon, and it goes with people's socio-economic and political development. And so we must acknowledge that some of those practices, we need to dump some of them and find a different attitude towards how we work with each other as human beings. And so this will come from a variety of angles. And this is important that we use Charlotte Maxeke's life as an example to illustrate that the skies didn't collapse because she became the first graduate, helped by the church. And so she also recognized the value of activism.
Absolutely.
It doesn't help us complaining, sitting down, complaining about this treatment and so on, and then doing nothing. When we have opportunities right inside our family, shall we call it the first organization?
We should, I suppose we could.
Yeah, except that, yes, it's that, and this is where the education that evolves inside the family influences the environment in which it is taken.
Isn't it interesting then, Deputy Speaker, when we talk about the family as the first organization where value systems are being inculcated into? So when we talk about value systems and those customs and norms, patriarchal, those inequalities between the way women raise their children, between how men raise their sons and daughters, who then takes responsibility? Because research also tells us that the value system that you get in the home, that is where you get your, that's where your life is based on. The way you interpret the world and the way you function in society, you learn that in the home. Now, if we're looking at all of these activities that government is, all of these activities that are being put in place by the SANAC sector, Parliament, social development, it's from the outside in. But if we're talking about influence and really psychosocial impact, how do we then begin to transform that space, the family unit?
The first one is to recognize that it doesn't do that in isolation. family itself is influenced by its location, in which neighborhood, in which country, and in which society. So in other words, there is clear influence of the environment in which the family does that. There's a mutual influence in the family and in society.
Absolutely.
So we must be able to recognize that. So there are things that the state, for example, and the government can undertake activities that removes the incentive to continue to regard women as inferior. Okay? There are societies that have demonstrated that in the world where the advancement of women became so significant that what people took as ordinary became, no, this has been nonsense all along. We couldn't have been believing this, but we thought it's right. That others elsewhere in the world still believe in it. It's said incorrectly, so we don't have to follow it. So we must recognize the importance of what the state, institutions, and organizations, including the religious organizations, if I may say so, and so that we recognize how it is important to undertake the work we've been doing, to provide evidence, to provide opportunities for reflection that demonstrate the value of the incorrectness of regarding women as inferior to men. Some of it simply takes action. The kind of leadership role South Africa demonstrated had a very important influence in the region, in the continent, in the world. If South Africa can do it, why are you guys holding us back? Women argue in other countries, in the continent and elsewhere. And as a result, the doors slowly began to open up. So it was important to provide that societal, above the family, evidence that, hey, let me say this, it's an important history lesson for us in Parliament, for example. When we first arrived here, one of the tensions that the chief whip then of the majority party confronted the Reverend Arnold Stofili, our former ambassador to Australia and so on, and former premier of the Eastern Cape, was the tensions that he had to intervene in that related to the changing nature in families, for example, of especially women, who now suddenly became the principal breadwinners in their families, and more than their men because they came to Parliament. And so the shifting power, economic power relationship inside those families was very significant and created tensions. Many, unfortunately, lost their relationship at the beginning of, as the effect and the influence of this situation began to hit home in those families, and the system was not ready to accept that. And so this is how the families, and unfortunately, in certain instances, those relationships were broken because of that. That suddenly, the economic influence in the family is no longer from the man or the man in the house, it's from the female. Even in the neighborhood, people who come visit now are no longer visiting the man per se, they are visiting the woman because it's a public representative. They want assistance from that point of view. And so the appearance and the reality that power has shifted was too much to accept in certain relationships. Fortunately, there were sober relationships that survived there. But it was a very significant evidence of how things can change and how in the process of changing there will be, let's call them fatalities.
Fatalities along the way and casualties along the way.
That provide good, healthy examples. That there are those who relationships that survive. That, okay, now it's the shifts that's taking place elsewhere. People were able to talk about it and they treated each other with absolute respect. And so those are examples of how families can adjust and deal with the changes of that nature in families. So it's been a very interesting example. That period, I've often thought personally that we haven't written enough about it to draw the attention of activists and families generally to recognize how fundamental those changes in economic relations led to a change in the attitudes towards men, towards women in society and so on. So that's an example of how experiences outside the family
absolutely
have an influence
have an
inside
influence.
the family that are fundamental.
Absolutely. That's very, very compelling story, Deputy Speaker. And I think also in relation to how even where we go, what we're going through right now as a country in relation to gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Gender-based violence is so deeply entrenched, and we know that women in this country, killings of women and just violence against women is 5 times higher as we compare to the global average. And if we're talking about the women coming into their own in relation to economic power, and also just not just economic power, we're talking about the ability to assert themselves in spaces where they're not allowed, where previously they were not allowed to assert themselves. There's that violence, the physical violence itself, which is very disturbing. But there's another violence that is often not spoken about, which is that emotional abuse, that intimidation. And very often when women, I remember in the Women in Conversation that we had, these are conversations that women have amongst themselves about the different forms of violence meted out against women. Not only the ones that you can see, the ones where women die and women are assaulted, there's the ones that are not so overt. And it also begins to speak to this transition, but there seems to be a resistance because we are going through a transition and women agree that more women are more educated, as you've rightfully pointed out. Women are beginning to speak out, but there is this clash. There seems to be this heightened tension. It's an onslaught, against the emergence of women coming into their own. How do we process that tension? What are the right platforms for us to process these tensions? Because we are having conversations as women. There's conversations that are now taking place, very important conversations amongst men. But where do we create the melting pot for all of these issues to be properly processed?
Let me say, recently we requested the East South Africa. Fortunately, they have been able to do so, to include in their discussion
we can already begin to regionally and possibly in the continent begin to respond to some of the issues that is there. And also we are part of the United Nations CSW that we usually attend in New York. So which means as South Africa we can take this project and say this is what we've been doing, this is the findings, and we can table this report at the United Nations, at the Interparliamentary Union, and that is how we can say we can make a difference, not only in South Africa, not only at the local level, but globally.
Let's now move on to other issues that affect women. May Charlotte Maxeke fought the system at a very high level within a very toxic context of colonialism and apartheid and so on. And we are in a different dispensation where people have their rights enshrined in the Constitution and we have parliament that ensures that these rights are lived up to. But we are still dealing with a very big scourge of gender-based violence, and it has become a pandemic on its own alongside the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, it's been going on for very many years. Is government's response plan effective in beginning to address the issues of gender-based violence?
If I may respond like that, the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. So we have all these wonderful plans, but we have to take everyone with us. And that is the most important thing. So government have got a very good plan. And what I also appreciate about the approach of government is the fact that civil society is very much involved in that specific plan. So now, in the rollout of the plan, if all of us really contribute in any way we can contribute, then we will have to see how successful it becomes. But without being negative, the problem in South Africa is still the issue of toxic patriarchy. And our men, young and old, still have that tendency. And I think it is also something for us as mothers to think about. How do we orientate our sons? How do we actually, what do we tell them? How do we make sure that they grow up and not have that toxicity that say, I am Mudora, and that is the problem that we are still experiencing. Because my son will say, I don't think my mother can open that bottle. You understand? Because not that he don't love me, not that he don't like me, but it's because he believes men are stronger than women. And I mean, strength is not measured on your muscles. It's measured on what is inside.
The resilience, as we see with Charlotte Maxeke.
As we see with Charlotte Maxeke, because at that stage, she became fearless. And what made her fearless? Because she was fighting for a cause. And what she was actually advocating or propagating is something that she believed in. And if you believed in something, you will be able to convince other people that the thing that I believe in is the correct thing. And you will be able to take them with you. So the problem, the biggest issue is the orientation of our male folk in this country.
I want to be all over the place with this issue because it's very big and it affects different sections of society like differently. We had a conversation yesterday with the chairperson of the National House of Traditional Leaders, and I particularly asked this question about toxic masculinity and the unequal treatment of women, particularly because it's entrenched in our traditions and customs as Africans. But before then, we had spoken to the Deputy Minister of COGTA, who touched on a particular issue that's currently happening, where one of the kings in South Africa was removed in the Constitutional Court because he was not the rightful heir to the throne. And a woman who is the rightful heir to the throne was installed, but he is refusing to take a backseat because it's a woman. I just want us to draw similarities to the context within which Makgomo Maxeke was fighting for women's rights. And the same struggle that we see women in the highest positions of power, like being a king, is fighting the same struggles. How do we approach this as a nation, not only as government, not only as parliament? How do we get to a point where women have equal rights, and they are there enshrined in the Constitution, but how do we get to a point where in practicality they have the equal rights?
Let me put it like this. Some things seem to be difficult until you really tackle it. And we've been working with the Men's Forum, with the Senate Men's Forum, and one of the areas that they have agreed to work on is to work with the traditional leaders, particularly at the district level, the same approach that we've been following, and then also work with men. But also there is a beautiful program of the Department of Social Development that are working with boys. And they want, and what I remember there was something that was so striking to me in what they said, in what they are planning to do. But they said, if you start with the boy today, in 30 years, you will have the men in this society that you want to see. A man that is fully engendered, that fully understand what it is all about. Because it becomes very difficult in traditional societies. That one we cannot deny. It becomes very difficult because this cultural and traditional practices is so entrenched. And a whole generation will have to die out for us to be able, as the next generations, to make a difference in this kind of story. Because it's a fact. I mean, I've mentioned about issues of parliament, I've mentioned about issues of government. We've seen it's very easy. It's very easy if all of us just agree to get to the, what, like I said, the Deputy Speaker termed an egalitarian society. There is another person that likes to say if we do all of this, we can reach equilibrium to get there. It is very difficult because individually, you should be convinced that this is the right thing to do. And how do I convince someone that is seeing that his power is going to be taken from him? And for that matter, Abafaza. I mean, you know how they are, how they speak about us. I mean, I'm sitting here and someone can come and call me Nkosazana or will call me Tombi. And I have to accept it because that is our orientation.
But how do we do this, ma'am? Like you saying perhaps the old generation will have to die, for instance. But I want to draw similarities to the issues of race relations in the country. Like we are in the new dispensation. It's been 27 years into democracy, but we're still struggling with the issues of racism and so on. What else can we do? Is it our education system? Do we start at primary level, teaching kids about equal rights? What else do we do? Especially that will involve men as well.
I now remember in the early stages of the consultation that we've been doing, and even in the programs that we had with social development, it came out many times that the curriculum will have to really be reviewed and begin to actually more lean through a teaching of gender equality, equal kind of education. If boys can do mechanical engineering, it must be equally from the onset be available for girls. Not they have to fight for it, or we must do it in a very methodological, just method is a method of making sure that there is equal representation, or someone is insisting on 50-50 and now it's coming like that. It needs to be instilled so that it becomes natural. That it's natural that it will be. If there is a boy, there will be a girl. If there is a woman, there will be a man. If there is a man, there will be a woman. If it can become like that, because the one thing about race relations, why we are still having that, sometimes people feel very comfortable to go to the old ways if they don't get what they want to achieve. They feel very comfortable in it. I was, for instance, I can mention it because I don't think it's an issue for me to mention it. I was saying to the people of the Western Cape, why are you so polarized? You don't speak together because of your political differences, but in the meantime, in the Western Cape, you find the most unequal societies because of the fact that people at the level of leadership that should know better just don't want to speak to one another. I don't want a leader to come to me to ask me to say, what kind of campaign can I run in my community? I want the leader to go to the community and ask, what is your needs? So what can I do? But in terms of this kind of polarization, you just find that people don't see eye to eye. They don't meet each other. And it's not even a race issue. It's an issue of power relations. That is the thing. And sometimes people use the etiquette of racism to make sure that they achieve what they want to achieve. Or they decide that I'm not going to work with this person, and I will say that this person is because he's black, he doesn't want to work with me, because he's white, he's not coming to the party. But the fact of the matter is that really, if South Africa was at a stage where we want it to be, we shouldn't even be speaking about racism at this stage.
Definitely.
The one thing that we should be preoccupied with is the development of our communities and to change the lives of society. That is what we should be preoccupied.
Definitely, ma'am. There's a lot that we can still talk about, but I'm looking at the time there. We're building up to the memorial lecture, which is starting like in about 5 minutes. So I have to release you so that you can go prepare for that lecture. So, but thank you very much for making time to talk to us. Viewers, we are indeed building up to this memorial lecture, Charlotte Maxeke Memorial Lecture, which is due to take place in about 5 minutes. And there's still a lot more, but there's a short clip that I want us to look at as we remember Charlotte Maxeke by Ms. Gertrude Shopper. Let's take a look. Oh, yeah.